So last time was our very first podcast recording, and it was just you and I. So Kellen and I joined together to talk about what it is we're trying to solve here. And when we take a look at the journey that we're headed on in this podcast, it really all comes back to understanding the role of creativity and helping folks make the world a little better. And spoiler alert, the name of the company. And one thing that we have started to uncover is that throughout the journey of going from I've got a really great idea to I think that this idea is really going to work to this idea is working and it's out there and this idea is making the world a better place. And suddenly we're starting to see a big impact and sort of that snowball effect. One thing that we're seeing is creativity can be one of the most critical tools you can use to get from a place where you could get stuck to that next level. And that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about why folks get stuck, where they get stuck, and how to use creativity to get unstuck from what we call stall points.
Yeah, that sounds great. I think just to add too, as an artist and as a creative, I'm stuck all the time. And it's a 5-minute Canva design that gets me right and back and ready. It's positioning. It's a, new shirt that I put on. It's something that I can just put on and change in a moment. And then we're here. I'm unstuck and it happens in just a flash. And I think with a lot of startups, we have to do that. We have to be nimble. We have to be quick. And I think that that's a great conversation for us to have.
What I'd love to do is just set up. We've got this is a really exciting podcast. This is the first one where we have guests, and we don't just have guests. We have the two most extraordinary guests that we could hope for. But I'm going to set up why they're the most extraordinary guests. Because what we are trying to do is understand how creativity can help us break through challenges. And when we talk about creativity, Callan, you and I talked about this earlier today. Mm-hmm. Creativity means all sorts of things to all sorts of people, right? If I just say creativity, what comes to mind for you?
Yeah, that's a great point. Like website, design, how I dress, what glasses, what frames I have, like what the app I'm using, how when I walk into a cafe, does it look nice? Do I want to get coffee here or would I rather just leave? It's all different ways. And when you say the word creativity, it's like I hear every different way. So I think it's really important to remember that how we represent ourselves and what our brand looks like and how we're showing off, everything matters.
Yeah. Well, and when we talk about everything mattering, is that how you say it? When
Yeah,
we talk about
that sounds right.
when we talk about how everything matters, creativity, there's so many different tactical things that we can latch onto, a brand, a logo, visual identity, verbal identity. But to me, it all boils down to one core human element, and that's empathy. Mm-hmm. It's the ability to understand who you're engaging with or where you're engaging, how they see the world, how they see you, and how you can adjust to make the impression that you want to make. And when we talk about these stall points, we'll go through these common stall points fairly quickly so we can have, time with our guests. But what we're going to see is that creativity solving these can be tactical solutions. It can be strategic solutions, but it all comes down to empathizing with the audience you are seeking to affect, right? The audience that is involved in getting over that transition. So, Callan, what do you think of when you think of empathy?
That's a good question. It seems like one of those buzzwords that, we actually don't like dive into and pick apart, but empathy is how you're looking into how other people's feel. How do you care? Do you care what other people are thinking? Do you care about when they enter a space, how they feel, what their problems are, what their concerns are? How you can kind of have that emotional ability to understand what people need and what they might be feeling and thinking. I think now in this world, it's really hard to do that. And with empathy, we can put ourselves in the mindset of somebody else and really ask those questions and still not understand, but maybe we can start asking them how they feel, what they want, what they need.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to get in trouble for saying this, but I think when we look at the state of the world, especially in this country, one of the things that is sorely lacking is empathy, right? There are a lot of folks out there who are wired exclusively to think about their own needs, what's right in front of them, how they can advance themselves. And there are others who are thinking about their community and the other folks around them, or even the folks they don't even know to think about. And so what's really interesting is in this podcast, we are here to talk about how you use creativity to get through these stall points and advance your ideas. But it all comes down to that core human aspect of, can you understand other people, their journey, their perspectives, and can you adjust yourself to work with them, to meet in the middle, to modify?
I'm thinking about the stall points and, we've been researching for the last 3 years and working with companies that are small, large, solopreneurs like myself. And the same constant themes keep coming up. And so when we ask ourselves, what and how can we do better? How can we dive deeper, ask those questions? It really is just like connecting with the people that are doing the work out there and seeing what it is that we can do. So I think like when it comes to empathy, and how it helps with these stall points is if we're seeing these trends and we're seeing where people get stuck, and if we know that there's something that we can do to help them, why wouldn't we do that? We were talking earlier about a choose your own adventure, and I've been reading Goosebumps Choose Your Own Adventure lately. And I think it's a perfect way to understand that, yes, you could choose that way, but you might end up at a dead end. And a dead end when you're starting a business could look like employees leaving. It could look like downsizing. It could look like a waste of resources and time and data and everything not making any sense. So when we think about these stall points, it's like, how can we move forward and how can we help since we have all the research and all the knowledge? And Simon, I appreciate you sharing the knowledge and the data because you could sell this knowledge and data, but you're making it free. So it's really nice that we can do this together and figure out together how to make this a little bit better.
One thing that I just want to respond to here is we're about to break down what these most common stall points are before we pivot into talking about our guests. But let's zoom out for a second. One thing that we talked about last episode, this shocking fact that is sort of at the foundation of why we're even having this conversation publicly, is that today 90% of impact-oriented startups will fail, right? So there are so many people out there who have really good, compelling ideas, solid ideas that could make our lives better. They could make the environment more sustainable. They could make humans healthier and happier. They could affect all of the areas that we're working in. But they get stuck and they don't make it past certain hurdles. And we know that creativity can be employed to help them get over those stall points. And the root of deciding in your choose your own adventure what the best pathway is having empathy, right? As you're sitting at a, do I go this way or this way? It's not about, do I go this way or this way? It's where would my audience receive me best, right? And that's what we're going to break down here. So if it's okay, I'd like to go through what those stall points are.
Yeah.
How we use creativity, give a couple examples, and then we're going to pivot over and talk to our incredible guests here.
I know that the first point is positioning, and I'd love to hear from your angle what that positioning means, Simon.
The very first point that an organization or an individual needs to make is how they want to show up in the eyes of the audience around them. So a lot of folks, and we're wired as humans to think this way, right? What do I need? What do I want to do? It's about me. It's about where I want to go. I've got my blinders on. And the reality is we live in a world where you can't do anything alone. It's all about how you engage and show up to others. And the very first point is deciding how you position yourself in the context of how your audience will see you. So that means understanding who else out there is doing something similar. What are you doing to differentiate and specifically articulate what makes your offering or your solution different or better, right? And before we even talk about creative tactics, which everybody jumps to, hey, let's make a website, let's do a logo, let's pick out colors, all this kind of stuff. Who do we want to be for which audience? And what are they already seeing? Just because we think this is what they want, do they actually want it? Right? So, Kellen, save me here. Rescue me.
Yeah, I got you. So, I mean, even one of the first questions, especially when starting a business, is who do I want to talk to? Who is my audience? Who are the people that I want to serve? Because when you're talking to adults, that's a completely different language than when you're talking to kids. Or when you're talking to your neighbor, that's a completely different language than somebody that's across the world. So even getting really clear in your positioning, who am I talking to and what is it that they need? And especially when we talk about empathy, those are the great questions to have first. And as Simon's saying in these stall or inflection points, it makes sense to research before you go into that, before you make a logo, because you might make something that is completely targeted for somebody over the age of 25, but you're looking like you're 13 and it doesn't read well when you have the language. So when you start to do positioning in that way, it's really important to know your audience and know who you want to talk to. And like Simon said, who is the audience? Who are your competitors and how are they doing it best? And can you copy a little bit from what they're doing so that you could just get that language and tone right? Mm-hmm.
I kind of wanted to add, at the risk of making this part of the conversation too long,
Yep.
we do have to address how creativity can be used to circumvent where folks get stuck. And I think the big takeaway for when it comes to positioning is if you take the time to understand your landscape, you take the time to understand your audience, and you take the time to understand how you can show up in a unique way and solve a challenge. The big question with positioning is how do you make that make sense to that audience in a creative and memorable way? Right? Again, before we even come up with what is my look and feel, how are we going to make a really cool interactive website or a really great video, whatever that is, does this make sense on paper, and can I articulate it in one sentence where that audience will see it and say, yes, where have you been? And that's where creativity really comes into play, is getting creative in a very crowded world. It's very likely that when you come out with your idea, somebody else has already done something similar, right? Your job is to get creative with how you can position it in a, I don't want to say better, but more attractive, more engaging, and more resonant way, more empathetic way.
Yeah, and once you have that down, I think that brings us to our second stall point, which is the QL.
Branding, the
Woo!
fun stuff, right? So everybody jumps to, oh my gosh, let's make a website, let's make a video, all that fun stuff. And it's important, right? But we now live in a world where attention spans are shorter than ever. The creative bar is higher than it's ever been. And we as humans have now been trained to subconsciously make decisions about the quality of something based on its look or feel, right? Its sound or smell, whatever the initial experience that we get is, we take approximately 1.5 seconds to judge whether or not we want to continue engaging with this.
Oh, wow.
Right? I know the stat that a lot of people pull up is you got 5 seconds in a video. It's even shorter now.
It's only 1.5 seconds now?
1.5 seconds is the current stat for somebody to say, I'm going to keep looking, or I've moved on.
I
Right?
believe it.
Which is, it's crazy. It's crazy.
Mm-hmm.
So branding is the art of creating a vehicle using creativity, a visual identity, a verbal identity to get them to sustain their engagement with you past that 1.5 seconds. So before they even finish reading that positioning sentence, they have to get the right feeling to keep reading that sentence. So you start by saying, this is who we are in the context of the world you're seeing and why you should want us. But we're going to deliver that in a vehicle that makes you say, ooh, tell me more, right? I like the way this feels.
I mean, that sounds good. I feel like we probably shouldn't talk that much about branding because I think a lot of people actually do know branding. You know, everybody is a brand now. It's like how Andy Warhol said back in the day. He predicted that we were just going to become brands, and now we all are brands. So if you look on IG, everybody's presenting themselves how they. I was looking over my IG and I was like, I need to be better at this. So I think that there's just all different ways of brands to look at it. What's our third stall point?
Third stall point, activating that brand, right? So classic statement, if you build it, they will come, right? Thank you, Field of Dreams.
Thank you.
We all know that that's not true. So the question becomes, when you've decided your positioning in your North Star, you've built the vehicle to create the right moment, the right feeling, the right vibe. How do you get that in front of your audience in such a way that they choose to engage and continue engaging and get the experience that they need, the information they need? What is your ecosystem, your website, your video, the tactical ecosystem that they will engage with?
Yeah, like whether or not you should be using LinkedIn or, IG or X, which I wouldn't use X at all anymore. So,
Yeah, that's going to be a no to X. But for our older audience, what's IG?
Instagram, thank you so much.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm an older audience, so I just needed you to clarify it.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, one day when you're old like me, you'll get it. So the kids will be talking about something else. You defined your positioning. You built your vehicle.
Yep.
You've built all the pieces to activate that vehicle to begin driving it. How do you get it in front of the right audience? And then how do you expand into new audiences, right? So scaling, right? So we can launch a website and then all our friends and family go, that's nice. And then nobody ever sees it again. How do we make sure when we launch our brand experience, it's getting in front of the right people in the right way? Or if we've already launched it, but we need to expand into a new area, how do we reassess that new region, that new community, that new culture, that new language, whatever the differences are, and go all the way back to our positioning conversation and say, is what we were saying to this audience what we need to be saying to this audience?
Yeah.
Callan, I was going to do the brute force thing, but I want, jump in, save me.
I mean, that's exactly it. Like when we think about, different audiences from around the world, and hopefully and truly your brand is going to scale so it becomes worldwide. You want to make sure that you're at least using Spanish in a Spanish speaking country. I used this example earlier with Simon. I went to Miami and I was in Little Havana, and the McDonald's had tiles that looked like a local artist created them. So I did not get that burger or fries or whatever you get at McDonald's, but I, however, was like, this is a nice touch. Maybe I'll walk in here and just kind of look at the art.
Yes, I too could not think of a better example than McDonald's adjusting their interior design to match Little
Uh-huh.
in Miami. But it is really a good point. And we see this in multi-billion-dollar global organizations who are trying to drive business in a different country or region and not taking the time to say, how do we make sure our translation is actually resonating with that audience? Right. And I'm not going to name names, of course, but I've just recently come across an organization who is putting out, I believe it was French, and it was very broken French, and they were confused as to why more folks weren't engaging with them. Take the time to empathize with your audience, put yourself in their shoes, and make sure what you're saying makes sense and resonates with them. So the last stall point for us is transformation, right? So we live in a world where entities are formed, they're grown, and then sometimes they get together, they merge, or one acquires another. Right. And there are instances where symbiotic organizations come together to form a more powerful entity, and other instances where one absorbs another and then some of the really good stuff disappears. Or even worse, it was a bad decision, a bad merger or acquisition, and both organizations fail. Right. So for us, one of the things that we've seen is examples where really compelling symbiotic organizations got together and created something that created a much bigger, impactful experience on a much larger audience. And in the same way, instances where organizations came together and they just imploded. So for us, it's also about understanding what is that North Star of this transformation. How are we going to navigate all of those pieces of the human puzzle and make sure that this thing ends up being beneficial for everyone?
I'd love to add a real world example to that because we're in Philly right now, and our ecosystem, I actually helped our ecosystem become top 25 in the world to start your startup here. And one of the ways that we're trying to do that is we're all working as different organizations to come together to figure out who does what, how do we do it, what's possible. And one of the authors actually in our region who has started a few different companies, Bob Moore, he wrote a book called Ecosystem Led Growth, where he talks about that and breaks that down about how we can work together as a community. Because if we think about our ancient ways as people and humans, you either work together or you went to war. And I don't want to go to war. I want to work together. So I feel like when we think about things that can be a little bit more transformative, how can we come together and how can we make this actually work?
Typically at these stall points, the way that we're wired, especially in this country, is, well, in order to get past this point, we need more money, we need more people, we need more resources, we need more partnerships, sponsors, donors, investors, whatever the case is. And creativity can be an equally powerful, if not more so, solution in some instances, right? If you imagine that you had to go on a roadshow for 6 months trying to find one investor to help you fund what you're doing, as opposed to spending 1 month building a really powerful brand that resonated with thousands of people at a smaller scale, maybe you can rethink how you do this. And maybe that's not the best example, but typically speaking, folks are looking at traditional solutions to each of these stall points, typically rooted in money. And what we're trying to convey is that if you look at creativity, it all starts with empathizing with who's on the next, who's at the next stage of this evolution. What are they thinking? What are they feeling? And how do I adjust to resonate with them? So let's talk about empathy.
Yeah, Simon. So who's on the episode today? I'm really excited to meet them.
Yeah, I am so excited for you to meet them and for our guests to meet them. So today we have Empath Labs and founders Aaron and Joel. I had the unbelievable honor of meeting them when ALBC was really, really young and still figuring out how we support organizations. We got to work with them to help them build and launch Empath Labs as a brand and their sub-brand Clinical Companions. But the way I came to learn about what they do is after a long time in healthcare and seeing the absolute missed opportunities, let me say, in pediatric clinical research. These guys are coming up with brilliant empathy-driven solutions to help clinical trials and healthcare experiences in general work for children, right?
Mm-hmm.
Work for kids who we currently, and again, I realize there are going to be folks who may disagree with this, but we generally treat kids as an afterthought when it comes to healthcare, right? And so these guys said, you know what? There's a better way to do this. We can make this a little better. And they came up with some really incredible, innovative, creative solutions, but I'm going to let them tell you about that. And obviously I'm very excited, so I'm going to stop talking. Welcome, Aaron and Joel. Please introduce yourselves.
Hi, thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks so much for having us.
Well, we are very excited to have you as our first guests here on this podcast. Can you tell us a little bit about Empath Labs and its origins?
Yeah, so Empath Labs, we founded the company 13 years ago after a really simple observation. We saw kids with type 1 diabetes taking care of their stuffed animals in the same way they were being cared for. So they were giving their teddy bears insulin injections. They were drawing little insulin pumps on pieces of paper and stapling it to their stuffed giraffes. And what they were doing is they were using their language, the language of play, to understand the world around them and their lived experience. And we've spent now over a decade helping children with diseases from type 1 diabetes, cancer, sickle cell disease, hereditary angioedema, right, better understand their care and to improve the patient experience for kids, for their caregivers, and ultimately through their continuum of care. And really excited to dive in with you both, with Joel, and explore what creativity has meant to us.
Oh, cool. I really just want to know even just your roles at the company and what you do. And also, I have type 1 diabetes. So hearing that, and I just recently was diagnosed. I know, isn't that cool?
We got to send you a bear.
I would love a bear. I love bears. Yeah. It means the world to me because I'm often thinking about how I can gamify my pump to make it a little bit more fun so that I could take care of myself. I love this so much.
What kind of pump are we dealing with? We have a T-Slim, we have an Omnipod. What do you have? What are you rocking?
I got a Medtronic 780G.
Are you on that like semi-closed loop system? Do you like it?
I am starting that soon. So I appreciate you knowing all of these things.
For sure.
I know. Thank you. So what is it that you both do at Empath Labs?
So I'm Joel. I'm the CTO of Empath Labs. We build a lot of different tools when we talk about improving pediatric patient experience. And we get to work with a lot of really amazing partners. And so technology for us ranges from the physical. We're manufacturing plush. We manufacture a robotic duck with Aflac. We build a lot of mobile apps. And so a lot of prototyping all the way to mass production.
Very cool. I love that. And Aaron, how about you?
Yeah, so I work a lot from a partnership development standpoint, so helping build partnerships that get our products into the hands of patients, either through pharmaceutical companies in the commercial and clinical space, or through some of our philanthropic partnerships. And then I work on the design side as well. My background is in mechatronics and user interaction designs, which is a fancy way of saying how people play with robots. And it's worth saying that we're a super small team. So Joel and I are 2/7, a very odd fraction of Empath Labs. And so we all kind of work across this continuum. We're a small team of super passionate people. When we're designing products, we're all in a room together. And I think that's part of the reason why we loved working with ALBC as we design the Empath Labs brand, is so much kinship and camaraderie in this kind of notion of how we work together and our approach to creativity.
I love that. And we'll definitely cross that bridge, but you're not getting off the hook that easily.
Oh no,
So
what's happening?
We're going to talk about creativity, but one of the things that I just really want to talk about coming up with this new innovative solution. I remember when I first learned about the state of pediatric clinical research, it was back in 2017, and we were exploring the fact that kids were just getting doses that were just halved, based on adult doses. And of course, that's not how metabolism works. And I thought, oh my gosh, it's 2017 and we still kids are such an afterthought. And out of the blue, we get to meet you guys who are taking such a human, kids first approach to what we're doing. And I just want to know, there are a lot of folks that have this idea, this could be better. What was it that actually got you to take that step and say, we're going to do something about it, right?
Well, I think for us, it was a series of baby steps, right? In hindsight, it looks like a leap. But at the time, it was just these little steps along the process. So when we started the company, I was in college. I had helped start an organization called Design for America, which is all about using design thinking to solve local problems with social impact. My passion, I grew up with human growth hormone deficiency. So I grew up giving myself an injection every single day. So our first step to say, hey, we had this idea. We saw children with type 1 diabetes injecting their teddy bears. We have this passion. Well, let's make a prototype. So we got a little funding from university. We spent 10 weeks. We made a prototype. We tested it with one kid. That's all we wanted to do. Make a prototype, test it with one kid. I'll never forget this little boy, Adam, out in Chicago. And his face was just plastered against the glass as we went up to his house to test the prototype. He was so excited. And we had a blanket over the prototype. We're very protective. We wanted to do a clean introduction interview, right? And he's so excited. We unveil the prototype and he's like, that's what it looks like. He just like rips it to shreds, right? High point to emotional low point. And then we took our next little baby step. We said, okay, like he was so excited about it. Maybe we should keep making these things and try to figure it out. So we designed another one. And we went along in this series of baby steps as we continued the company over 13 years until we kind of got to the space where we were at, where we met you all, and where we took a quite a big step into the field of clinical research. And we said, how can we use these methodologies which intrinsically emotionally engage children and caregivers in their care? And how can we leverage them to solve some of the problems that are inherent to clinical research and inherent to starting a new drug, like medication adherence, like communicating to people across the spectrum of health literacy? How do we involve the whole family in caregiving and include siblings? So all of these things just kept taking little steps down the road.
Yeah, and I'd like to quickly comment as well, and please feel free to cut me off, anybody, because I talk a lot. But I love the journey of baby steps. And when we think about doing a little better, like you said, as we look at this 13 years later, it looks like a massive leap where you revolutionized pediatric care. But the reality is it's a journey, lots of little moments, right, of finding new ways to iterate, readjust what your positioning is, readjust how you're branding and packaging yourself, and over time getting better and better. And I almost think, our society has done us a disservice where we think we've got to just dominate the world immediately. We have to come out with that product that's going to go viral or whatever crazy term you want to use. But real innovation, real progress takes time, and it takes those little steps. And I'm curious, along that journey, were there moments where you felt like we are just stuck? What do we do? Did you have stall points along that journey? I feel like you must have.
And just before we talk a little bit about the stall points we had, just to add on to that idea of like these incremental steps and like kind of like the false narrative that grows about how you can like instantly jump or leap into something. We've met a lot of people along the way that have helped us tremendously in these 13 years. And so the steps from like starting as this university project of like helping, how might we help a person with type 1 diabetes, to then where we are with clinical trials today, people saw incrementally the work we were doing and helped us identify opportunities. Say, oh, I think this could be a good fit here. Or have you experienced like an idea? Have you thought about bringing it there? And, a lot of those are not always the right fit. We've met a lot of people who had ideas or felt very passionately that we should go in a particular direction. Sometimes we jumped in with them and we found that was like a dead end. But just kind of that has been a huge part of the journey of it's not just our own conviction and our own roadmap. It's not, we're not an insular, isolated kind of team in defining that. It's like we embed with people and really fortunate for the folks we've met along the way to help us shape where we are today.
I just resonate so much with that, Joel. And I think that, when we say creativity, I think that we're also just looking at human and we're looking at people, because that's really what it is being able to take those signs and those stall points or those moments where you feel like you can't keep going, and then having somebody come out of nowhere and say, well, why don't you try this? I know that it's always frustrating moving through and trying things that don't seem like they're working, but it is really powerful to be in alignment with a community that is for what you're doing. And in those moments as founders or a small team where you don't think that you can keep going, it's the community that lifts you up so that you can keep doing this, because this is something that's really important. And especially with kids, my dad was a director at Merck. So he led pharmaceutical trials all the time, and he would do it in the 90s. And during that time when asthma for children wasn't really considered at all, he was creating different programs on how to help the kids and how to speak in their language. So I really understand like the power of being able to listen and to have the empathy and to keep going. So I really appreciate what y'all are doing.
No, I just wanted to jump in too, because, we're talking about creativity and we're talking about empathy as a core of creativity. I think this point, Kaylin, that you brought up about community is so valuable, because I'll say for me personally, creativity comes from a source of vulnerability and a source of being in an environment free of judgment. And building a community that gives you that creative confidence, I think, is so critical to allow you to think about the next adjacent possible. Like creativity happens at these mashups and at these intersections of two things that we never kind of pushed, or three things we never pushed together before. And, empathy is at the core of building that community, right? And connecting to it. And then there's such beautiful things that happen when you're in these environments and supported by folks on your team, but also, as you talked about, your personal community at these low points, right? Where you settle your roots, the richness of that soil, to then give you the environment free of judgment to keep going when you do bottom out.
When we first met you, you weren't called Empath Labs. You were called Sproutel, right? Can you tell us a little bit about what inspired you to say, you know what, it's time to reposition ourselves, rename ourselves, rebrand ourselves? What was the origin of that?
I mentioned that we're a company that has been around for about 13 years. And you could imagine in that stretch of time, as Joel was talking about, with everybody that's helped us out along the way, we've done a range of different things. So over our first 10 years, we've always been serving this pediatric community, but we did it in very different ways. We were building these tools like My Special Aflac Duck for kids with cancer and sickle cell disease, Rufus the Bear for kids with type 1 diabetes. And we were working in a space where we were really tapping into these products that are philanthropically distributed. So Rufus the Bear is given for diagnosed with type 1 diabetes in the US, in Canada, and Australia, which is wonderful, right? My Special Aflac Duck, through funding with Aflac, is provided to any child that wants it with cancer and sickle cell disease in pretty much every hospital in the US and in Japan. And so we built up this business as Sproutel. And then something really magical happened as we started discovering some of the challenges in clinical research. And we realized that we were starting to outgrow our brand. We were moving from a company that was creating these products that were very purpose-built for a specific illness, moving into a company that was creating something that was more scalable. And we had some really practical challenges. Every time we introduced ourselves, people would say, oh, Sproutel? Sproutel,
Yeah.
right? And so there were some really practical challenges, and our name didn't evoke what we did. It was indicative of a past kind of time for us. And, in all honesty, we came up with the name in a 12-hour brainstorming stretch because we needed a name for our incorporation docs. And the business accelerator we did said, you can't incorporate with the name of your product. We were going to incorporate as Jerry the Bear, the name of our first teddy bear for kids with type 1. So our name came from a place that served us really, really well, but we started to outgrow it. And we really wanted to embody a name that we could say proudly and that you heard and it made sense for the type of work that we do. And so Empath Labs just really encapsulated everything we do. I mentioned all of our products, but we use a patient-centered, empathy-driven design process. So we work hand in hand with our patient communities to design these products. And we wanted a name that kind of shared that heart of who we are.
It's a great name. Can I just add, it's a really great name. I don't know, did we help with that name at all? Did you guys just come up with that name? How did you come up with that name together?
There were a lot of names that didn't make the final list. Aaron, I think you maybe spent a long day in a hammock and came up with a lot of names.
We went on a vision quest. Yeah, it did involve, actually it was a solid 3 days.
3 days.
3-day name storm.
That's perfect. Yeah. What was it like working with a young ALBC? How did we help you?
It was great. It was super energizing. And I think as Aaron mentioned about outgrowing where we were and wanting to be invigorated with this new launch, the collaboration with ALBC, even just the way that we worked together, injected a ton of energy at that time, which was really exciting for us. One of the first things that we did with Simon and Allie was to, I think, Simon, you sent over a questionnaire for us to fill out, for everyone on the team to fill out. And you asked us, like, who are folks that whether they're on our board or like our customers or people we would want to be our customers. You said, like, can you interview them? Can you spend time with them? And so it was, I don't think that's a process we would have done. That's definitely not a process we would have done on our own. No way. So that was a key part, I think, of like shifting our perspective, like taking a big step backwards from where we were and saying, like, this is really a big opportunity for us, not to just have a new website, not just to have a new name, but to really say, like, put both feet back into the mission. What does this mean for us? Yeah.
I think that's great because, you guys are doing that for the kids where you ask them what they need and you check in on them. So it's nice that ALBC, that we would return that to you so that you could see what it is that you need.
I just wanted to quickly comment. This is such a great example of this is what you do for a living. You are Empath Labs. Your job is to empathize with others, but for whatever reason, you don't do that for yourself in your own business, right? And isn't it strange in a way that for whatever reason, even the most empathetic, wonderful humans will just move forward and say, well, let's get this done so we can look at other folks. And so I think it's a really important point that everybody, no matter who you are, needs to take a moment and do that self-discovery, do that discovery with your audiences. An organization built around empathizing with others, right? Built to understand the feelings, the emotions, the experience of others, didn't take the time to do that for themselves. And that's something we're trying to help folks understand. But also cognizant of time, what I'd love to know, and maybe Callan, you can think of a great way to ask this, but you guys have come on such an extraordinary journey and you have a long road ahead, a good road ahead, a great trajectory. But what would you say to other folks who are on the fence about jumping in and trying to make their idea happen? I mean, do you have any words of advice, words of wisdom that you would leave folks with when they're debating, can I do this? Can I really do this? Can I pull it off?
I really think just going back to baby steps, like starting doing your own thing isn't about going out and raising a ton of money. It's not about going and building a fully featured prototype even, or a fully featured product. It's not about going and hiring somebody. It's about just like taking the first step, which maybe that's like spending Saturday and Sunday working on your project. And maybe it's about getting together with a friend and taking a weekend and doing a jam session and building an MVP or building just one screen of something. Maybe it's about opening up a Canva, as Kaylin was talking about, and just letting something out, getting that creative, that first mark on the paper. I think a lot about a painting, right? If you're a painter, it's like getting that first mark on the canvas. It could be so scary, right? What if it's in the wrong place? What if I'm using the wrong color? What if it's too thick, too thin? It doesn't matter. If you don't like it, start on a new canvas, right? Like it's just about taking that kind of that first step and breaking down something big into something really small. Because ultimately, if you're going to have a successful company, 90% of them fail, and they don't fail immediately, right? Like, you have a lot of time to figure it out, to take a lot of these steps. And so if you kind of start to increase your investment as you figure this out, you could have alignment, because your first idea probably won't be the idea that goes the distance. We have changed our course so many times from what we started as, but we took it in small pieces, in small chunks. And mind you, we never raised a ton of money. I never went out and raised venture or anything like this. So, yeah, I really think there's so many pieces of advice, but just one is starting with these baby steps.
That was great. Joel, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I guess to try to take it in a little bit of a different direction, that first step, for the baby steps of getting started, like, you'll spend so much time thinking about yourself, what your product is, how do you build it, the team that you build it with. It's also really important to spend a lot of time thinking about the people you're building it for, and not just your users, but who are your customers. And that's something you never stop thinking about, because it's easy to think like, oh, we launched our like you talked about like what it means to activate the brand. Like, that's, activate can sound like it's like a one-time thing, like you launch. But with the short attention spans and the fact that like you might be changing a lot even after you first met someone, like, it's like you keep reactivating. And even though you might have new features or new ideas or new directions, and you think those are the things to talk about, it's also really important to keep talking about the basics and the foundation, because when you meet someone new, they don't know anything about you. And so it's not just about what's your newest thing, it's just who are you, what do you do, how do you keep it like really simple? I don't know. It's something that we keep reminding ourselves.
So it all comes back to positioning, right? Understanding who you are in the context of the world around you, empathizing with your audiences, and making baby steps along that journey, right? And doing it with a community.
We talked about how we got started and the community we got started in, and the product we got started with. And when we got started, and for the first number of years after, like even in the first like 10 years, we looked at our company as providing products and providing services. And we thought that the path to scale and the path to growth was to build more product, and to get product to be this engine that would be our engine for growth. Like, if we can't scale services without scaling people, but if we could scale products, then we would be able to grow in a way that would be more sustainable. And our viewpoint and like the way that we positioned ourselves to think about product was a little bit narrow, and that created a stall point for us, because we thought we would immerse ourselves with families, with medical professionals. We would build a product with the community to help the community. And then we thought that we could kind of distribute that product, and we could move on to like focusing on another aspect of that community, thinking we would build another product for them, or how we might enhance the product we had already made. Never thinking that it was so quick you could just ship it and walk away, but more just not thinking about the whole positioning along that spectrum. And so we got unstuck from that by the virtue of having a long-term relationship with our partners, where we could look at how they implemented the product, and then learning about the opportunities to help turn products into programs. And how important it is it's not just the product we make, it's also what the training is to like for people to become aware of it, what the scaffolding is that you build around it so people can activate all of the features that you design. So many, like, I don't read instruction manuals, right? It's always like, how could you possibly think that any of your customers will discover all of the wonderful things you might think that you put into something? And so I think that's what I would think of as a big stuck and unstuck.
Would it be fair to sort of echo back? You were thinking first about the product, but then what you were getting stuck on is the fact that the product is one piece of a much larger ecosystem. And that in order for that product to work for the end user, you have to understand the environment around it, how they interact with it, the real world of no, they're not going to read the 20-page manual that came with it, right? And really taking the time to say, okay, we finished the product, but we're not done, right? We have to make sure that this works in the context, empathize with our audience, right? And flip that back. And so once you started doing that, the product started growing and evolving and expanding and becoming much more effective and scientifically measurable, et cetera. Is that a fair assessment?
And I think to jump up one layer too, it's then also like the program in context of the whole ecosystem. So thinking beyond the relationship between us, our customer, and our end user, because customers were parents, end users were kids, and thinking about what is the ecosystem that those parents and children are in the support services that they're getting for their type 1 diabetes, in the organizations that are already outreaching to them, that they're already getting their support services through, and how do we not think about, in a sense, me being at that time Sproutel or Empath Labs, but we, right? Like, how do we achieve this goal of comfort? How do we work with the existing ecosystem? And as Joel said, that switch flip from thinking product, which is kind of individual, to program, which is ecosystem community, then enabled us to also unlock the business models that enabled impact at scale.
So yeah, we want to hear a story about a real life example of how this worked. After you did this, give us an example of the real life impact.
Well, Callan, you were just telling us about your dad and his transformative impact in developing, medications for children with asthma. So an asthma story comes to mind, actually. We had a parent write into us that they had a 2-year-old child, and it's always a battle for him to take his inhaler, use the spacer, do all of this stuff, and even go to doctor's appointments related to his asthma. And the parent wrote in that they used our product, our Bear, our clinical companion, demonstrated using an inhaler, and he took his inhaler, and it wasn't a battle. And this parent was just like overjoyed. They nicknamed the bear Boo Boo Bear, and they're like, Boo Boo Bear got my son to take his inhaler. They were so excited. So that's just one example, and that is, we have just oodles and oodles of stories like this across kind of the different patient communities that we work with.
Oh, yeah, that's really great. I also have a follow-up question, not to add more time, but how are you showing your case stories? Like, how are you telling these stories of these great, amazing legacy things that you're building?
So great that you asked. So we do it in a number of different ways. For one of our products, My Special Aflac Duck, which is for cancer, sickle cell disease, and blood disorders, we actually interview every year child life specialists that use it and families that use it. And that video actually just got posted on Aflac's website. And they're using it to communicate with their audience about this type of work. So if there's going to be a link somewhere, we can throw a link that you can include kind of in there. In our new work in clinical trials, it's actually rather difficult because the product impact happens in the context of a clinical study. So we're not having direct interface with patients. So we hear a lot of stories through the clinical research sites that write in. Actually, we just presented at a conference with one of the sites in a study we're in for a very rare disease called hereditary angioedema, that one of her 9-year-old patients took the bear in and did show and tell and explained his illness to his whole class using the bear. And so we get a lot of them in as well through the medical professionals that we work with. And this year, we're actually doing a little bit of work to try to document some of those stories and elevate them a little bit more.
So I'm cognizant of time, and thank you guys for hanging on so much. It is absolutely wonderful to have you. It's wonderful to see you. When we think about doing a little better, I can't think of a better example than Empath Labs, right? You saw an opportunity for a population of folks who needed a better experience. You found a way to solve it. You iterated, you did baby steps for 13 years, and you are now in clinical trials who are helping, I want to say countless, I know it's not really countless, but countless children who would have otherwise had a really not great experience be able to have a better experience, right? And you're doing that by innovating, you're doing that by being creative, by adapting, and you're doing that by not giving up. And so thank you for sharing your story, and thank you for making the world a little better.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah. For having us.
Wow, that was really cool, Simon. I loved getting to know the guys at Empath Labs, especially being diabetic, especially all of the different crossovers with asthma and the kids. And I'm often thinking about the parents, truly, as I'm giving myself injections. How are these parents doing with their kids? And I'm lucky to be the one in my 30s to get diagnosed, but I think about the 2-year-olds. So Love the guys. I'm so glad they joined the show. Thank you.
Callan, I just wanted to quickly say, so you were sharing your own struggles with treating your diabetes, right? And one of the things that I think we often feel as humans is there's nobody helping us. There's nobody out there. And for me, Empath Labs is a great example of there are extraordinary people everywhere trying to do extraordinary things. We hope we can inspire more folks to join that journey and translate what they think is impossible into going for it, right? And it takes time, it takes baby steps, but there are so many incredible people trying to make this world a little better. And again, I'm so glad you got the chance to meet Empath Labs.
Me too. I'm definitely inspired. And speaking of inspired, our next episode, which is our episode 3, are we going to be talking about how creativity can solve things? I think, we were talking about that earlier. Aaron had mentioned it, that instead of going to VC capital or dollars or spending all these different areas, we're going to focus on how we can use creativity to solve those things. Is there anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I just wanted to dig in more. We talked about Empath Labs has not gone for a VC raise or traditional investors. There are so many ways that are not financial to be able to solve problems, to get around issues, and to move forward past those stall points. So we'll dig into specific examples of how to do that next week.
That sounds great with another new guest. Next episode, we're talking with Dr. Kimberly McGlone, who's really cool and one of my favorite idols and icons. She's got a book out, Build It Boldly, and she's a serial entrepreneur who really cares and exploring how creative thinking can be more of a powerful problem-solving tool than just relying on the finances and time that it takes to get things done. We can solve these things with our creativity.